The Alpha King thought he'd pick an ugly duckling at the mating auction, but is shocked to unveil. The twilight sky over the kingdom was a muted swirl of purples and grays, as if the world itself hesitated between day and night. A soft mist rolled across the cobblestone streets of the capital, carrying the scent of pine, damp stone, and the faint tang of magic. At the center of the city, the grand hall of the mating auction rose like a blackened jewel, its spires reaching into the half-light like sharp fingers. Tonight, whispers and rumors would mingle with destiny, and the powerful would choose their future companions under the gaze of all. Kale, the Alpha King, arrived in silence. The long, dark cloak he wore brushed the ground with every step, and his boots echoed against the stone floor, each sound a subtle declaration of authority. His face was set in its usual expression of control, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes like polished onyx, lips pressed in a line of unyielding command. He had ruled the kingdom for more than a decade, feared by his enemies, respected by his allies, and whispered about in hushed tones even within the walls of his own palace. But tonight, he would act differently. Tonight, he sought not power but simplicity. Kale's advisors had insisted he choose someone of beauty and nobility, someone who could strengthen alliances. But he had grown tired of courtiers and princesses, their smiles polished and empty. Tonight he wanted someone unremarkable, someone overlooked, someone who would not challenge him, or so he thought. The auction hall was alive with murmurs and candlelight. Hundreds of nobles, warriors, and curious onlookers crowded the gallery, their masks hiding expressions that betrayed their interest or envy. Below, the auction floor stretched wide and polished, a stage for the kingdom's tradition. Stalls lined the room, each one holding a potential mate, some elegant, some plain, all waiting for the judgment of the Alpha. Kale's eyes swept across the crowd, indifferent. He noticed the tall, proud princesses with their jeweled gowns and the noble daughters who carried themselves like small statues of porcelain. He did not linger. His gaze fell instead on a corner stall, dimly lit, almost ignored. She was there alone, her posture hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. Her hair, a tangled brown, fell over her shoulders in messy waves. Her hands fiddled nervously with the hem of her simple dress. Her eyes, soft, uncertain but bright, glimmered in the candlelight. Ilara, she had come from the outskirts of the kingdom, a land whispered to be cursed, where shadows lingered longer than they should, and trees seemed to whisper secrets to those who dared to listen. She was meant to be overlooked, the so-called ugly duckling, and she knew it. All her life, she had hidden in corners, learning to move silently, to speak softly, to make herself invisible. Kale approached her slowly, his shadow stretching across the floor like a wave of darkness. The room fell into quiet expectation as everyone watched him walk toward the small, unremarkable figure. Some whispered that he would not stop here, some dared to hope that he would. When he reached her, Ilara lifted her head. She expected a glance of pity, a fleeting smirk, or the polite dismissal of someone who chose her only out of obligation. But Kale's eyes did not soften. They did not judge. They did not look past her. He simply looked at her, and in that look a quiet storm began. "Name," he said, his voice low, smooth, carrying authority without cruelty. "Ilara," she whispered. The word sounded smaller than it should have, a soft echo of herself. "You are from the cursed outskirts," he said, as if stating a fact rather than asking. Ilara's breath caught. How could he know? Few spoke openly of the cursed lands, and fewer still dared to speak to her about them with respect instead of fear. She did not answer. She only nodded slightly. The audience held its breath. Nobles and courtiers leaned forward, expecting amusement, expecting mockery. But Kale did neither. He simply studied her, his dark eyes as unyielding as stone, yet carrying a curiosity that none had seen before. "Step forward," he commanded. Ilara hesitated. Her heart pounded, her hands trembled, but she obeyed. Every step felt heavy with destiny. She had never imagined the Alpha King would call for her, let alone choose her. The murmur in the hall grew louder. Whispers of disbelief, gossip, and speculation drifted like smoke. The courtiers exchanged looks. Some smiled slyly, thinking him distracted or indulgent. But Kale's attention never wavered. He circled her slowly, like a predator examining prey, but without menace. His scrutiny was different. He was not measuring her for her looks, her strength, or her connections. He was measuring her spirit, her courage, her presence. Alara felt the weight of his gaze and found herself trembling, not from fear, but from something else, something she could not name. The feeling was both terrifying and intoxicating. She wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the shadows as she had done all her life, but something about him held her in place. Something about him made her want to be seen. Kale paused before her. "You are small," he said, almost a statement of surprise, "yet there is something." Alara's mouth went dry. She did not know what to say. The audience waited. Some dared to hope that he would choose her. Others were certain he would turn away, leaving her humiliated before all. Then Kale made his decision. He raised his hand, signaling the auctioneer. "She is mine." A stunned silence swept through the hall, broken only by gasps and whispers. The small, awkward girl from the cursed outskirts had been chosen by the Alpha King himself. No one had expected it, no one had imagined it, and Alara herself was too stunned to move. Kale stepped forward, offering his arm. "Come," he said. Her hand hovered over his arm, uncertain. Then slowly she accepted. Her touch was brief, trembling, but he felt it as if it carried a spark. They moved together through the hall, the audience parting before them like water. Every gaze was fixed, every whisper sharp as a blade. As they left the auction floor, Kale did not speak. He did not ask questions. He simply walked beside her, his presence immense, shadowing her, protective and powerful. Alara could feel the eyes of the court upon them, judging, fearing, and wondering what it was about her that had captured the Alpha King. They reached the outer gates of the hall, where moonlight spilled over the misty stones. Alara paused, looking up at him. Why me?" she asked softly, her voice barely more than a breath. Kale did not answer immediately. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers. There was no flattery, no teasing, no cruelty, just observation. And then, in a voice that held both command and curiosity, he said, "Perhaps you are not as small as you believe." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She had spent her life hiding, convincing herself that she was invisible, unworthy, and unremarkable. Yet the Alpha King, the ruler feared by all, had chosen her. And in his gaze she felt seen. But the feeling was dangerous. She could not yet know whether it was mercy, fascination, or something darker. She had heard stories of kings choosing those who could bring them glory or ruin. The stories had ended badly for those girls. The journey back to Kale's citadel was quiet. The streets were empty, the mist curling around their feet, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was charged. Every step felt measured, deliberate, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When they arrived at the citadel gates, massive and adorned with iron and obsidian, Kale paused. He looked down at her once more. "Tonight you are mine," he said. "But tomorrow you will begin to understand what that truly means." Alara swallowed hard, her nerves a tangle of fear and excitement. She wanted to ask him what he meant, but the words stuck in her throat. Something in the tilt of his head, the curve of his lips, and the intensity of his gaze told her that the world she had known was about to change forever. As the massive gates closed behind them, the shadows of the citadel stretching long and dark, Alara realized that she had stepped into a story far larger than herself. And somewhere deep inside, a spark of courage flickered, small, fragile, but unextinguished. She did not yet know what awaited her in the halls of the Alpha King. She did not yet know the secrets he guarded, the darkness that lay beneath his power, or the depths of her own hidden strength. But she felt it faintly, like a heartbeat in the shadows, the promise of a destiny that could change everything. And Kale, watching her from the high steps of the citadel, sensed it too. A shadow beneath the shadows, a strength beneath the meekness, a secret that would shatter expectations. Neither of them spoke, but both knew one truth. The quiet girl from the cursed outskirts was no ordinary choice. And the Alpha King, for the first time in his life, was not certain who was truly in control. The moon hung high, silver and cold, as the gates sealed shut. And in the silent citadel a story began, a story of shadows, secrets, and a spark of something neither of them could yet name. The night held its breath, and so did they. The citadel rose like a dark sentinel above the cliffs, its towers clawing at the misty sky. Within its walls, shadows danced along stone corridors, flickering with the light of hundreds of candles. The air smelled of old stone, cold iron, and faint traces of smoke from the hearths that burned deep in the great halls. For Alara, the citadel was both magnificent and frightening, a place where every shadow seemed alive, watching her, waiting. She walked beside Kale, her hand brushing against his sleeve as he guided her through the halls. Though his grip was gentle, the power behind it was undeniable. Every step she took reminded her that she was no longer in the quiet outskirts of her village. She had been chosen by the Alpha King himself, a decision that could change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. The citadel was vast, with corridors that twisted and climbed, filled with ancient tapestries, the eyes of long-dead kings staring down from embroidered threads. Servants bowed as they passed, whispering polite greetings and curious glances. Knights walked at attention, their armor gleaming in the candlelight. And through it all, Kale's presence remained constant, a silent shadow beside her, unyielding and commanding. "You will eat in the dining hall," Kale said without turning, his voice steady and calm. "Afterward I will show you to your chambers. There you may rest or prepare yourself for the lessons to come." Alara's throat tightened. Lessons. She had expected a bed, a place to stay, perhaps a simple routine to adapt to this new life. But lessons implied instruction, control, and the possibility of failure. She nodded, unsure what else to do. When they entered the dining hall, the grandeur of it stole her breath. The ceiling stretched high, adorned with dark wooden beams carved into the shapes of dragons and wolves. Long tables stretched from end to end, polished to a mirror shine, each seat marked with the crest of the ruling house. Candles flickered along the tables, their light reflecting in the polished floors and creating shadows that seemed to move like living creatures. Kale gestured to a seat at the head of the table. "Sit," he commanded. Alara lowered herself onto the chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes moved across the hall, taking in the opulence and the servants, the guards, and the portraits of kings long dead. She had never seen anything so vast, so carefully maintained, so imposing. Kale sat opposite her, his gaze unflinching. For a long moment he said nothing, observing her with an intensity that made her heart pound. "You are not afraid?" he asked finally, his voice low. Alara hesitated. Fear fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird, but she also felt something unfamiliar, a spark of courage. I am cautious," she admitted. "This place is new. Everything is new." Kale's lips curved slightly, a hint of a smile that seemed almost cruel in its rarity. "Caution is wise," he said, "but there is strength in facing fear." She looked down at her hands, unsure what to say. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft footsteps of servants bringing food. When Kale finally spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made her straighten in her chair. "You are not ordinary, Alara," he said. "Do you know why I chose you?" Alara shook her head. "I do not. I thought you might have picked me because I am small, quiet, and unnoticed." Kale's eyes darkened, a storm behind them. "That is exactly what I thought at first, but there is something about you, something I did not expect." Alara's breath caught. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the words lodged in her throat. Whatever it was, it frightened her. She had spent her life hiding, never revealing herself, never daring to be noticed. And now the Alpha King himself had seen her. After the meal, Kale led her through the citadel once more, this time to a wing she had not yet seen. The corridors were narrower here, lined with ancient books, strange artifacts, and symbols carved into the walls that seemed to shimmer faintly in the candlelight. "This will be your chambers," he said finally, stopping at a large door made of black oak. "You will rest here, and when you are ready you will begin the lessons. There is much you must learn, not only about this citadel but about yourself." Alara stepped inside. The room was simple compared to the rest of the citadel, but it was warm and welcoming. A large window looked out over the cliffs and the misty sea beyond. A soft bed, covered with blankets of deep blue and gray, awaited her. A writing desk, a few chairs, and a small fireplace completed the space. Alone, Alara allowed herself to breathe. Her body ached from the tension of the day, from the weight of being chosen, from the uncertainty of what was to come. She walked to the window, looking out at the cliffs and the dark sea. The world felt larger than she had ever imagined, full of possibilities and dangers alike. The first night passed in restless dreams. She saw shadows moving in the corners of her room, whispers curling around her like smoke. She woke often, heart racing, until the pale light of dawn crept through the window and chased the darkness away. Kale's lessons began the next day. They were not what she expected. He did not teach her to bow, or to speak in courtly manners, or to perform the simple etiquette of a noble. Instead, he guided her through the corridors of the citadel, showing her its secret passages, hidden chambers, and the symbols carved into its walls. "You must understand this place," he told her, his voice firm. "Power is not only in strength or wealth, it is in knowledge, in secrets, in what is hidden from those who would harm you." Alara listened intently, her mind opening to things she had never imagined. She began to understand the layers of the citadel, the silent rules of its halls, the ways shadows could hide or reveal truths. And she began to sense that Kale was watching her, always observing, always testing, not with cruelty but with a challenge that made her heart beat faster. Days passed, and the tension between them grew. Kale's presence was constant, yet unpredictable. He could be distant one moment, commanding the next, his gaze softening only slightly when she demonstrated insight or courage. Alara found herself drawn to him, fascinated by the way he carried authority without arrogance, by the glimpses of vulnerability he hid behind his dark eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the citadel was bathed in a golden haze, Kale led her to the highest tower. From there, the kingdom stretched below them, forests and rivers winding like silver threads through the land. "Look at it," he said. "All of this is ruled by those who understand nothing of what lies beneath. Those who see only the surface are blind to the truth." Alara followed his gaze, her heart swelling with awe and fear. She understood in that moment that the kingdom was far more dangerous and complex than she had imagined. And she understood, too, that Kale was not merely a king. He was a man who carried burdens she could barely comprehend. "You have strength," Kale said, turning to her, "more than you know, and soon you will need to trust it." Alara felt a shiver run through her. She had never thought of herself as strong. She had survived the shadows of her village, yes, but power like this, responsibility like this, it was something else entirely. "Why me?" she asked again, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Kale's eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "Because you are not ordinary, because you hide more than the world can see, because I need someone who can walk through darkness without losing themselves." The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning. Alara did not know whether to feel pride, fear, or something she could not name. She only knew that she wanted to understand, to meet the challenge he hinted at, even if it terrified her. That night, as she lay in her chamber, she could not sleep. Thoughts of Kale, of the citadel, of the lessons yet to come, swirled in her mind. She thought of the shadows in the hallways, the secrets hidden behind walls, and the strange power she felt stirring within herself. A soft sound drew her from her thoughts. She rose, moving to the window, and looked out into the night. The moon was full, casting silver light across the cliffs and sea. And then she saw it, a flicker, a shadow moving with purpose, almost as if it were alive. She gasped softly, stepping back. Her pulse raced. She had felt something before, a hint of her own hidden strength, but this was different. This shadow was deliberate, intelligent, and it moved as if it were watching her. A chill ran down her spine. She sensed danger, but also opportunity. The citadel, the kingdom, and even Kale himself were filled with hidden truths, secrets waiting to be revealed. And she knew, deep in her heart, that her life would never be the same again. Outside, the night wind whispered through the towers, carrying the promise of trials and revelations. And inside, the Alpha King watched silently from the shadows, sensing the same spark in her that he had felt from the moment he chose her. Something extraordinary was awakening. Something neither of them could yet control. The forest beyond the kingdom's borders was older than any living memory, a place whispered about in fearful tones. Trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches tangled together to form an almost impenetrable canopy. Mist slithered along the ground like silver snakes, curling around roots and rocks, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and magic. Kale and Alara rode through the twisting paths on horseback, their cloaks brushing against the saddles. The Alpha King's eyes were always scanning, sharp and vigilant. He had chosen to come with her into the cursed lands himself, despite the warnings from his advisors. The stories spoke of spirits, hidden traps, and curses that could claim the unwary. But Kale was not the kind to fear shadows he could face. Alara rode beside him, her fingers gripping the reins tightly. Her heart pounded, not only from the thrill of the forest but from the closeness of Kale. She could feel the steady strength of his presence, the rhythm of his horse, and the quiet power that radiated from him. Her own pulse seemed to echo his, a beat she had not known she could feel so vividly. "This forest is alive," Kale said, breaking the silence. "It watches. It remembers, and it tests those who enter." Alara nodded, her gaze sweeping the dark, misty woods. She had grown up on the outskirts, near lands that carried whispers of old magic, but this was different. The forest felt aware, almost sentient. Shadows moved with intent. The wind carried voices that were not quite human. And deep within her, a power she had only sensed in moments of quiet solitude began to stir, responding to the forest, to Kale, and perhaps to the danger that waited ahead. "Why did my family leave this place?" she asked quietly, her voice almost lost in the rustle of leaves. Kale's expression darkened. "Because it is dangerous, because power here is not forgiving, and because your ancestors left debts behind, debts that must now be settled." Alara swallowed. She had always known her family carried some secret, something unspoken that marked them as outsiders. But she had never imagined it involved curses and debts of the kind Kale spoke of. And yet, standing beside him, with the forest pressing close around them, she could not turn back. The first night in the forest was restless. They set camp near a small clearing, the moonlight filtering through the twisted branches above. Alara struggled to sleep, listening to the sounds of the forest, low murmurs, rustling leaves, and whispers that seemed to drift just beyond her understanding. Kale sat near the fire, sharpening a blade, his eyes never leaving her. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked. Alara nodded slowly. "Yes, something inside me, it's waking." Kale's gaze softened slightly, though the intensity remained. "It is the curse of your lineage, but it is also a gift. You must learn to control it, or it will control you." She shivered, both from the cold and from the weight of his words. The idea of a curse was terrifying, yet there was a thrill in knowing that she possessed something rare, powerful, and potentially dangerous. Over the next days, Kale guided her through the forest, teaching her to feel its currents, to sense hidden dangers, and to draw strength from her own abilities. The lessons were not easy. Shadows moved in ways that confused her. Whispers of spirits tried to sway her mind. And her own power, when it surged, was unpredictable, leaving her both amazed and frightened. One afternoon, as they navigated a particularly dense part of the forest, a sudden sound stopped them in their tracks, a cry, sharp and desperate, cutting through the mist. "Stay close," Kale commanded, his hand on the hilt of his sword. Alara nodded, her pulse quickening. They moved cautiously toward the sound, the forest closing in around them. Through the trees, they found a small figure trapped in a tangle of roots, a faint aura of fear radiating from her. Without hesitation, Alara stepped forward, placing her hands on the roots. The power within her responded instinctively, twisting, weaving, and bending the shadows around her. With a surge of energy, the roots loosened and the girl fell free, gasping for air. Kale watched silently, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. He had seen power before, but the way Alara commanded it, so instinctively, so fearlessly, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The girl looked at Alara, eyes wide with wonder and gratitude. "How did you?" she began, but Alara only shook her head. "It is nothing," she said softly, though her heart raced with excitement and fear. She had never realized how much power she truly held. That night, as they set camp again, Kale studied her closely. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "And yet there is danger in your strength. You must learn to control it fully, or it could destroy more than just the forest." Alara nodded, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "I want to learn," she said. "I want to understand what I am, what I can do." Kale's expression softened for a brief moment. "Then we will start at dawn. But know this, power without control is dangerous, and control is not something you can give freely. It must be earned and it must be respected." The days that followed were filled with lessons, challenges, and moments of unexpected closeness. Kale pushed her, tested her limits, and forced her to confront her fears. And through it all, a subtle bond grew between them, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and something deeper, more complicated. One evening, as they rested near a small, mist-covered pond, Kale broke the silence. "Do you trust me?" Alara hesitated. She had spent her life trusting few people, and trusting a king who wielded power like a weapon was not simple. I want to," she admitted, "but I am afraid." Kale's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Fear is natural. Courage is acting in spite of it. You must remember that." She looked into his eyes and saw something she had never expected. A man who carried the weight of a kingdom, who commanded fear and loyalty, and yet, he was not unshakable. He had vulnerabilities she could sense, even if he did not reveal them. And for the first time, she felt that she was not merely the chosen. She was a participant in a story larger than herself. As the night deepened, a strange sensation grew within Alara. The shadows around the pond seemed to respond to her presence, stretching and twisting as if drawn to her. She gasped softly, her hands lifting instinctively. Kale watched closely, his face unreadable. "Alara," he said quietly, "the forest is testing you. Do not be afraid of what it shows you. Fear will weaken your control." She took a deep breath, centering herself, and focused. Slowly, the shadows settled, moving in harmony with her will rather than against it. A small triumph, but significant. She had glimpsed the potential of her own power, and it exhilarated her. Kale nodded slightly, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Good," he said. "You are learning faster than I expected, but there is more to come. Stronger forces, deeper shadows. And your curse will reveal itself fully soon." Alara's pulse quickened. The word curse carried weight she could not ignore. She had always known her family's past was unusual, marked by whispers and secrets. But now, in the heart of this living, breathing forest, the truth of her lineage felt closer than ever. The next morning they came upon an ancient ruin, hidden deep within the forest. Stone walls, worn by time, were covered in strange symbols and moss. A faint aura of magic hung in the air. Kale dismounted, studying the markings. "This place was once a sanctuary," he said. "It holds answers, but it is not safe. There are spirits here bound by old magic, loyal to no one. You must be ready." Alara followed him cautiously, her senses alert. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder, heavier. Shadows moved along the walls, not random but deliberate. Whispers curled around her, speaking words she could not understand, touching fears and memories she had long buried. Then suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, a spirit bound by magic, its eyes glowing faintly. It moved toward them with unnatural speed, and Kale drew his sword, stepping between Alara and the apparition. "Stay back," he commanded. But Alara felt something stir inside her, a surge of energy she had not yet experienced. Her hands lifted instinctively, and a wave of light and shadow radiated from her, pushing the spirit back. Kale watched in awe as she controlled the energy with precision, guiding it, bending it, mastering it in a way that even he had not expected. The spirit faltered, then vanished into the air, leaving the ruin silent once more. Alara's chest heaved with exertion, her heart pounding with exhilaration and fear. Kale approached, his expression unreadable. "You have power," he said quietly, "but it is only a fraction of what lies within you, and it will not remain hidden for long." Alara looked into his eyes, a mixture of fear and determination. She realized that the forest, the spirits, and even Kale himself were all part of a world she had only just begun to understand. And within her, the spark of her hidden strength blazed brighter than ever. But as they left the ruins and the forest closed behind them, a chill ran down her spine. Somewhere deeper in the shadows, something watched, waiting. And Alara knew, with a certainty that made her blood run cold, that her journey and the tests to come were far from over. The storm came suddenly, like the anger of the heavens itself, black clouds swirling above the citadel. Rain lashed against the stone walls, wind bending the great towers as if the fortress itself were groaning under the weight of some invisible hand. Within the castle, torches flickered and shadows stretched long across the halls, moving with the restless energy of fear and expectation. Alara stood beside Kale in the throne room, the heart of the citadel, where kings had ruled for centuries. The room was vast, filled with carved statues of ancestors, heavy curtains darkened with the night, and the polished obsidian floor that reflected the flickering firelight. The air was thick with tension. Outside the storm raged, but inside an even greater battle waited, one that could decide the fate of the kingdom. "The court has betrayed us," Kale said, his voice low and firm. "They sought to use your power, Alara, to overthrow me. To take the throne while we were away in the cursed forest." Alara's eyes widened. She had feared the whispers of betrayal, the plots hinted at in the castle corridors, but hearing it confirmed, she felt both anger and fear. "Why would they do this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Kale's gaze hardened. "Because they feared what they could not control. Your power, it unsettles them. They see you as a threat, and they are willing to act on that fear." Alara's hands tightened into fists. The power within her pulsed, responding to the tension, the fear, and the injustice of it. She had learned much in the cursed forest, and now she felt its full weight pressing against her. She was no longer the timid girl from the outskirts. She was something more, something feared and perhaps even respected. "You are ready," Kale said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "Not just for the throne, but for yourself. The court cannot take this from you if you do not let them." Alara swallowed hard. She felt the energy within her rise, a steady, controlled current of shadow and light, the culmination of her lessons in the forest. It was a strange, thrilling sensation, the knowledge that she could protect herself, that she could confront those who sought to harm her, and that she had the strength to stand beside Kale as an equal. The first challenge came almost immediately. From the gallery above the throne room, a figure stepped forward, a noble she had seen at the auction, eyes sharp, face twisted with envy and ambition. He raised a ceremonial dagger, chanting words that vibrated with magic, intending to bind Alara's power and seize control. "Stay back," Kale commanded, stepping forward. His sword was drawn, a glint of silver in the torchlight, but even he seemed cautious. This magic was not ordinary, it had the strength of old, forbidden spells. Alara did not hesitate. The shadows around her stirred, coiling like living creatures. She raised her hands, feeling the currents of her own power respond to her will. The air seemed to thicken, bending to her intent. The noble's spell collided with her energy, a bright flash of light and darkness twisting together in a storm that shook the throne room. Kale watched, awe and concern etched into his face as Alara controlled the surge. She was no longer frightened. Her power flowed from her as naturally as her breath. With a final motion, she directed it outward, and the noble was thrown back, disarmed, his spell undone. He fell to the floor, stunned and powerless, while the shadows that had obeyed her returned to stillness, curling gently around her feet. The room was silent for a moment. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. Then slowly the courtiers began to murmur, realizing that the quiet girl they had dismissed was no longer anyone to underestimate. Kale stepped closer, his expression softening. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said, almost in wonder. "And yet, you are still learning." Alara's chest heaved with the effort, but a smile tugged at her lips. "I am ready to learn more," she said, her voice steady, confident. "And I will not let them control me, or you." Kale nodded. "Good, but there is more at stake than the court. The curse that marks your family is ancient, Alara. It is tied to the very power you now wield. If you are to stand as my equal, you must face it fully." Alara's pulse quickened. She had felt the whispers of the curse since the forest, the strange energies that pulsed within her when she was frightened, angry, or determined. She knew it was tied to her lineage, to the debts her ancestors had left behind. But facing it fully, that was a risk she could not yet measure. Kale placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "We will face it together. You are not alone, and whatever comes, I will stand beside you." For the first time, Alara allowed herself to believe that she was not just a pawn in a kingdom of power and shadows. She was a partner, equal in strength, equal in spirit, and perhaps equal in heart. The final trial came that night. From the deepest corners of the throne room, the shadows began to move, gathering into forms that were both human and monstrous. They were the remnants of old magic, bound to the curse that haunted Alara's family. Their eyes glowed with a pale, eerie light, and their voices whispered threats, memories, and fears that pierced her mind. Kale stepped forward, sword in hand, but this time he did not act. He let Alara take the lead. She inhaled deeply, closing her eyes, and let the power flow through her. She had learned to control it in the forest, to shape it, to guide it. Now she directed it outward, weaving shadow and light into a force that could confront the spirits without destroying the room or herself. The shadows hesitated. They recognized her strength, the lineage that pulsed within her veins. And then, with a surge of determination, she reached out, touching the edge of the curse, feeling its weight, its fear, its anger. She did not reject it. She embraced it, taking it into herself and bending it to her will. The spirits screamed, not in anger but in recognition. They had been waiting for her, testing her, seeking the one who could master the power once feared and lost. And now they bowed, dissipating into the air as whispers of respect and acknowledgement faded into silence. Kale stepped beside her, placing a hand gently on her back. "You did it," he said softly. "You faced the curse and it yielded to you. Few could do what you have done." Alara opened her eyes, the weight of the power settling within her like a familiar cloak. She felt transformed, not only by the ability she now commanded, but by the understanding that she was no longer the timid girl who had entered the auction months ago. She was a force in her own right, a partner to a king, and the heir to a legacy she now embraced rather than feared. They stood together in the throne room, the storm outside finally breaking, rain pelting the windows, lightning illuminating the towers, thunder rolling like the heartbeat of the kingdom. And in that moment, Alara understood something profound. Strength was not just about power. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to embrace who you truly were. Kale turned to her, his dark eyes softer than she had ever seen. "I thought I chose you," he said quietly, "but perhaps you have chosen me as well. Not as my subject, not as my ward, but as my equal." Alara's lips curved in a small, confident smile. "Then let us rule together," she said. "Not as master and servant, but as partners. Whatever comes next, we face it as one." Kale's hand lifted to hers, and for the first time there was no hesitation between them. He took it firmly, as if sealing a pact that went beyond words, beyond titles, beyond fear. The storm began to ease, leaving the citadel drenched but unbroken. Outside, the kingdom waited, unaware of the transformation that had occurred within the walls of the throne room. The court, the rivals, the spirits, and the curses had all been confronted, and a new power had been born. Alara stood beside Kale on the steps of the throne, looking out over the kingdom. The night was clearing, the moon breaking through the clouds, and the first hints of dawn painted the sky with soft gold and violet. She felt the wind on her face, the energy of her own strength within her, and the steady presence of Kale beside her. "Together," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Together," Kale echoed, his voice carrying the weight of promise and resolve. The shadows in the citadel no longer seemed threatening. They moved in quiet obedience, reflecting her power and the balance she had created. She was no longer a pawn. She was no longer afraid. She was Alara, wielder of a family's legacy, partner to the Alpha King, and master of her own destiny. And as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, illuminating the towers and cliffs, the kingdom itself seemed to awaken to a new era, a time of strength, wisdom, and partnership born from courage, trust, and the shadows that had once threatened to consume them. Alara smiled, finally free of doubt. She had faced the curse, embraced her power, and discovered her true place, not beneath anyone but beside the man who had chosen her, and who had allowed himself to be chosen in return. The throne of shadows was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of balance, of strength, and of hope. And within its walls, Kale and Alara stood together, ready to face whatever came next, their hearts and powers intertwined, unbreakable and resolute.